All right, there we are. We're live. I'm going to just go ahead and jump right into the first question, and hopefully we can just power through it today. So the first question is going to be coming from Zetidic, and he actually posted it in the text form, but he's going to be coming in and joining us for voice in just a moment. But I'm going to read his text question first, just so we have some context. He says, conflict is defined in terms of action, specifically human action, but what about accidental homesteads and accidental aggressions? I suppose the accidental homestead joins your human action by entering an unowned resource into your embordered resource that is part of your action, and that the accidental aggression stems from your resource that is part of your action, let's say your body. So I'm going to give him the opportunity to flesh that out, I guess, and I'm assuming Zulu, that you don't find that to be an unusual or unfamiliar question. So I guess we can just pull him over and get to it. All right, Zetidic. Sorry, I hope I didn't interrupt your conversation with the screener, but we were ready for you, so we kidnapped you. All right, I just read your question as you posted it in the text channel, but I think it would be appropriate to give you a chance to flesh it out yourself now, now that you're here. Perfect. Well, hey, before we move on, if you guys are comfortable to continue speaking just briefly before we pull in the next caller, it sounds like we're having some audio issues again, so I'm going to just keep playing around with that, and we can buy ourselves a few more minutes if that's all right with you both. Here, I'll just say that maybe, and just for the sake of getting you guys back on track while I work on the audio issues, it always seems to me sort of interesting, the question about accidental aggressions, because it seems to me if you just start with the definition of aggression or with a concept of property rights, you can kind of rule out having to consider accidents in the first place, because if you just go through the step-by-step of, well, what is a violation of property rights, you don't really ever have to consider the mens rea as Zulu said in the first place, because you can fully qualify an act as having been a violation of property rights or not fully before you have to have any opportunity to introduce the accidental aspect.
A guide to your action. Well, if you don't have mens rea, then it's not actually acting as a guide there. Um, Obviously, because by definition of what mens rea means, which is having your guilty mind. So if you don't have a guilty mind, then you couldn't be guided away from that type of thing unless you're being negligent, in which case you would have mens rea potentially. But the place where it does come in, the big area would be punishment theory. So I agree with Stefan Kinsella's theory of dialogical estoppel. Now, this basically is the classic eye for an eye system, where if I punch Ask Ancap, then he gets to punch me back in the same sort of way. So that can only work. His argument for that only works if mens rea is present. If there is no mens rea, if he accidentally punches me or whatever, maybe he's got Tourette syndrome, right? Then he's not stopped from denying the retribution. So that's where mens rea really kind of plays a key role.
Right. I was gonna say something about, yeah, human action. Yeah, just like Ask Antcap said something about conflict being about property rights violations or aggressions, or yeah. But yeah, like the reason I asked is because like conflict is defined in terms of human action. So like that's where like I got the confusion, I guess. Because if it's just accidental, it wouldn't be like purposeful behavior in that sense, you know. But it would kind of stem from the purposeful behavior, I guess, with the exclusion, basically. But yeah.
So Zatidik, you're satisfied that the question is answered?
Yeah, I suppose so.
Sweet.
I guess
Well,
it's more for like newbies and such. I guess like people who are or interested in ANCAP but haven't been well versed in it, I guess.
sure,
Is
sure.
that your goal with it? Sorry for speaking so sloppily.
Not at all. Yeah, I think. Well, that's if I'm understanding the question. Definitely, that's what the goal here is to. I want to reach. I mean, hitting the socialists is a great achievement as well. If we get them to be part of the dialogue, but really, I'm most interested personally in reaching libertarians who are sort of minarchists or new to libertarianism in general and haven't really heard this perspective properly fleshed out before. That's my personal priority. So.
Nice. Yeah, I'm done, I guess. Yeah. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for calling in. I appreciate it. If you have any developments on that you want to, have a follow up, please feel free either ask it in the submit questions, and we'll get to it if we're at a callers, or just jump back in the end of the queue. Thanks so much.
Thanks.
All right, so that's the audio issues are resolved during that. Thank goodness. I'm gonna continue to keep a close eye on that. The next question that's coming in from MC Shroom is asking whether or not you can aggress on somebody by manipulating or controlling their emotions. So the reductio of a no would clearly be a depression sleepiness gun that can practically destroy the life of another person if shot at the correct moment or consistently at the same target. And he says he's interested in joining the VC to make his case more thoroughly. So let's get him in here. All right, MC Shroom, welcome to the chat.
Hello.
Hi, we just read out your text version of your question, but now that you're in here, you feel free to make your case.
Well, I think the text version is good enough, honestly. I guess I could add in the obvious, conclusion if the answer is yes to this, is that it will make something like blackmailing be illegal and be an aggression, as it will be a form of, manipulating the emotions of another person, and then, for example, trying to make them to give you money.
So I think we have to be clear by what the means of manipulation are. What are licit means versus illicit means.
Mhm.
Now, your example of like the mind control ray, where I can just make you feel however I want on any sort of issue. Well, that would involve some sort of like literal me moving around like the neurons or whatever in your brain, where I might as well just be moving around your arms, right? It might as well not even be a mind control ray as against a body control ray. It strikes me as being essentially identical there. But if I'm just really mean to you, well, how you feel about that isn't actually in my direct control. How you feel about that, me being mean to you, well, that's going to be based on your premises. If you really want to be my friend, then it might hurt you deeply. But if you really just don't care about me at all, well, then you're probably not going to give a shit, right? So that is entirely within your control, how you feel about me just being mean to you. Whereas if I'm using some sort of ray, that changes quite a lot.
Mm-hmm. So in a sense, then, the ray would basically be able to change your premises, and that's why it would be an aggression.
And specifically, it doesn't just change your premises by, like, convincing the person of doing it, right? Because I could change your premises by, like, convincing you that your premises are wrong. But it's changing it by, like, effectively going in and performing brain surgery on you. Or even just making your mouth move in different ways, like literally telekinesis move your mouth to say premises that you don't believe in. Now, you don't even need your brain in that case. It would be equivalent.
Mm-hmm.
The way that I like to approach this, and I feel like I have a sneaky suspicion that there's going to be a lot of opportunity for nuance here, but I like to use the example of a birthday party invitation. So often, especially when you're talking with socialists, this is going to come up because of how they view the terms involuntary and aggression and stuff like that totally in a different light. I think if you think about a birthday party, it's not an aggression if you say to someone else, I'm only going to go to your birthday party if you come to my birthday party. And I think that really, one really crystal clear way of understanding why that doesn't constitute an aggression is because if you go into the anatomy of what the threat is, what's the content of the threat, what's the meaning of it, the person is threatening to do something. And so it is a threat because it's saying if you don't meet these conditions, then I'm going to do something that's going to be essentially a negative incentive for you in some sense. But it's not an aggressive threat because what they're going to do if the condition's not met is completely constrained to their own property. So their body is their property and they can choose whether they want to go to the birthday party or not. And you can sort of separate this from the body and you can put it out into just property in general. You can say, well, I'm only going to let you have a slice of my cake if I can have a slice of yours. Things like that. And I think that if you really get into what's meant by, like, let's look at just the reductio by itself first. The reductio has to be implying if the condition's not met. I mean, I'm simplifying it. I don't think your reductio as you presented it actually had a threat now that I'm thinking about it. I think it was just you're just doing it to mess with somebody. But if you...
Yeah, basically. It's not a threat.
I'll reason to that through the threat context first. If you say to somebody, you know, if you don't come to my birthday party, I'm going to not invite you to mine, we can see that assuming these people actually like each other or want to go to the birthday party, not being invited to the birthday party could have social ramifications. And we know, like, psychologically speaking, that those kind of things, exclusion, can actually cause very easily detectable neurological symptoms like pain and stuff like that. So very real consequences, but totally not aggression because we recognize that you're acting on your own property. People having opinions about that is not where an aggression comes in. So you take the threat out of that, I think that the functional components are still the same, which is to say, if you say, if you don't come to my birthday party, I'm going to shoot you with a gun that's going to affect your mood, even if the gun works in some magical way where there's no physical contact, clearly the content of the threat is, if you don't meet these conditions, I'm going to act on your property, which is your mood, which is part of your physical existence. And I think that if we can, I think seeing it that way gives us the opportunity to sort of, okay, well, your hypothetical doesn't have the threat aspect to it, but I think it's still clear that what you're doing does constitute crossing that threshold, interacting with somebody else's property in a way that's unequivocally a property rights violation. What do you think, Zulu? Am I close?
Yeah, I would agree with that. And the way it's very similar to the way Walter Block puts it, which is what sorts of threats are fine. He says that a threat is fine if the thing you're threatening is something you're already allowed to do. So you'd already be allowed to just not invite them to their birthday party. So you're allowed to make that clear beforehand. Like, hey, if you don't do these things, I'm not going to invite you to your birthday my birthday party. Like, so because you're already allowed to do that, you just are allowed to say, these are the conditions under which I will not invite you to my birthday party. But if you were going to instead get really pissed off at him and shoot him, you wouldn't be allowed to, in the first case, shoot him because you got pissed off at him for not inviting you to his birthday party. And then so you're also not allowed to threaten that. You're not allowed to say, hey, if you don't do that, then I'm going to shoot you. So I think that's definitely correct.
What do you think, MC Shroom? How do you feel about that?
Yeah, so I definitely agree with the coding of, like, basically the gun being the same as, someone basically telepathically controlling your body, in that sense, yeah. That definitely makes sense. What I'm more so struggling to see is, let's, not have it be a gun, let's just have it be some kind of manner of effect where the other person has recognized that you have those certain premises that would mean that you would recognize their action as something, really bad for you, and you'd get into this horrible depression or mood, after that. And that person, recognizes that and then acts in that way specifically to get you to act in that other way and to cause you those emotions. Because, like,
Sure.
in a sense, you don't want, those emotions to come to you, while the other person wants that to happen. Wouldn't that be, in a way, of a conflict over your body?
So what I'm saying, the distinction there between, like, the mind control ray is, like, yeah, I might be really, really intelligent and I could figure out exactly what premises you have, and I might know the exact buttons to push to make you feel depressed. That might be the case. But still, those premises you hold that I identified, those are entirely within your control. You are able to choose which premises you have, and by choosing whether you think or evade is in the fundamental sense, I believe. So that is under your control. It's not under my control. I'm not actually able to directly make it such that you feel a certain way. That I'm able to identify the choices you've already made, and then identify that, okay, well, given those choices, he's going to feel this way if I say these things to him, unless he decides to make a different choice. So long as he keeps going down his same path, I might be able to make this guy feel sad. But that doesn't mean that you could at any point disengage from me making you feel sad, and I would have zero power over that. So you are in effect going along with my manipulation in a legal sense, right? So your actions, your choices are not being infringed by me in any way. They're being, I'm taking advantage of those choices you're making, but you're still going along and making those choices of your own volition. So your actions are not contradicted by any of my actions.
So in a sense, then, like, a more like an analogy to this would be the person I'm saying is an aggressor, but maybe I guess it isn't, the person, that is causing the emotional harm, if we could call it that, is basically swinging an axe, in the air. And then, like, the person feeling that emotion is putting their hand, in the way of the axe, in a way, or choosing to have your hand be there. Is that kind of the idea?
So the problem with swinging your axe at someone isn't that it causes them fear, because it would still be a problem if you were engaged with some sort of psychopath who didn't have the ability to feel fear.
No,
But you'd
I
still be
mean,
aggression.
that's not what I meant. What I'm trying to say is that, like, he's swinging the axe just in the air, like, you don't fear it or anything, The point is that, he's basically making this danger, before you. And then, like, it's your choice to actually put your hand, to do the axe or not, in the area of the axe, That's what I'm trying to say. It's kind of that way with emotions, Like, it's your choice to fundamentally choose to have those.
Well, so if you don't put your hand up and stop the axe, it's going to come down and hit you in the skull instead. So
Well, no, he's just...
you're fully within your rights to exclude the axe murderer from your body.
Yeah, but I'm saying he's just swinging it in the air. He's not swinging it at you.
Okay, so
I didn't want to...
I want to be clear about this scenario. Is it just like I'm just like in my garden and I'm swinging my axe around for like sparring practice or something, and then you run up and like put your hand in the way?
Well, what I was trying to say is that, someone manipulating your emotions is analogous to this scenario, in the way of like that you're the one putting yourself in, danger in a sense, because with emotions, you choose to have those ideas, and with the sense of, the axe guy who's just swinging his hair, you're choosing to have, your hand in the way of the axe. He may. Let's say that he's the same way as the guy who's trying to manipulate. He's intending you, to put your hand in the way of the axe, but he isn't actually, he doesn't have the power to actually change if you put it through or you don't.
If I can, I want to sort of. There's something I think is really interesting about this question that goes back to the core, the original question you pose, which seems to be something like, I think what you're tapping into is this sort of, your emotions are part of your physical body, and something someone's doing is influencing them. So isn't that sort of violating your ownership because it's being influenced in a way? And I think if I'm right that I'm tapping into the correct concern there, I think one way to look at it is, imagine you have a house and you're in a suburban neighborhood, and your goal isn't to have a greenhouse. Your goal is to have a greenhouse that's between two orange houses. Now, if you own 3 houses that are consecutive to each other, that's a very reasonable goal to have. But if you own just the greenhouse, and you bought that greenhouse because of the fact it was between 2 orange houses, what a unlikely scenario. And then after you move in, one of the guys who lives in the orange house decides he wants it to be a different color now. So you can no longer satisfy this end of yours, which was that you want to have a greenhouse between 2 orange houses. So you've got this physical property that's satisfying your ends, and now all of a sudden, because of someone else's action, it's not doing that anymore. Does this constitute a violation of your property rights? And I think that the key here is to really understand that the delineation has to be, and I think Zulu is far more effective at me than really grounding how we're going to make this demarcation justified. But property rights are telling us what we can and can't do with the physical things directly, in a sense. So you can paint your house. You can't have the expectation that it's going to be between certain other colors, if that makes sense. And similarly, like the same exact is true for your emotions. So just because the action somebody follows through with their own property has an emotional impact on you, it doesn't seem to me to be distinct from saying, well, I wanted my greenhouse to be between 2 orange houses, and I'm sad. I'm no longer. Does that make sense? So I guess what I'm trying to say about the houses is, it's property rights are telling us the specific things that we can do with specific things, and they're clear about this is a physical material thing that I own, and I'm able to do all of these things with it. Somebody else's house, by virtue of being someone else's house and not mine, is not a justifiable expectation that I can impose just by having an end that relates to it. And the same must be true for our bodies as a physical thing, and our emotions as they are related to these other expectations. If you want to have a birthday party with 17 people and 16 people show up, you can't point to a physical property rights violation. Am I making sense here? Does that seem convincing?
Yeah, I would say so. So I do see where you're coming from. Like, I think it's pointing at the fact that basically an emotion is a reaction, in the same way that, the house being between the two orange houses is, or a relationship between those. And maybe I guess the legal answer would be that you can control the object, but you cannot control the relationship of that object with, other objects that you do not own.
Yeah, if I could say it...
In a sense, that's what emotions are.
Sure, if I can say it in as few words as possible. If I have a hat, it's my hat, I own it. I can do anything I want with that hat, except put it on Zulu's head. I can't do that. And so
Yeah.
that's really just that single principle applies to everything. I can, with my house, I can own anything I want. Sorry, anything that I can do anything I want to what I own in the house itself. But I can't say, well, my goal with the hat is to put it on Zulu's head, so he's violating my property rights if I can't put the hat on his head. Similarly, I can't say I can say I want my house to be green. I can't justify this end of somebody else's house having to be a color too. That goal is just violating the property rights, basically a priori. It's just not an appropriate goal. And similarly, if you have an emotional state, because we're not talking about the emotion manipulating gun anymore. You're just saying, well, somebody's caused me emotional harm. You don't have the right to expect other people to do certain things with their property, if that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
So, how do you feel about that? Is that convincing?
Yeah, I'd say so. I definitely have to rewatch it, kind of think more about it, but yeah, definitely.
What always happens to me when I get into a conversation like this one is as soon as I step away from the conversation, within 30 seconds I'm like, oh, I should have said, X, Y, Z. So if you think of anything, please either post it as a text question in the submit questions or come on back in because we don't have a big queue of calls today, so feel free.
Okay, I will.
So I guess we'll call that call there. I do have some written questions we can go into. Thanks again, MC Shroom. Before we jump into the written questions that I have had submitted, do you want to say any closing remarks on the conversation that just ended?
I think what we're getting at the end there was entirely correct way to look at it, which is that fundamentally property rights, they boil down to a right to exclude. And this comes from the non-aggression principle. What does aggression mean? It means the initiation of conflict. So from this you get Deus's let exclusion stand, that if I'm already going about and using something, I'm excluding other possible actions with that thing, I should be allowed to continue excluding those other actions. Otherwise it's an aggression. But I'm not able to actually, it's physically impossible for me to ever exclude a person from hurting my feelings. I can exclude my emotions, because my emotions are some sort of relationship between my mind and the actions of others. Now, the only way I could ever exclude partially my emotions in this sense is by putting myself into total sensory deprivation. But then you can see that, well, it's on me to do that. It's not on other people to not do things that might annoy me.
Right. Yeah, I think that's an interesting way of putting it. I think it's just because of the natural tendency for double negatives to be tricky for the brain, but I think that the language around exclusion is so logically effective, but just I always have I try to stay away from it just because I get tripped up sometimes when I end up making sentences with double negatives and getting confused. Just openly admitting to being a little slow.
I mean, it's equivalent to control. I really do believe that it's equivalent to control. Some people disagree with this, but I've not seen a single convincing argument that exclusion is the be all and end all, and control is just this naive misunderstanding of what property is.
Sure, at the very least, it seems that one must imply the other, two sides of the same coin sort of deal, just like how
Mhm.
the relationship that true and false have, right? Like to say something is true is to say that it is not false, vice versa.
Yeah.
So I think that those two definitions, control and exclusion, they must have a similarly close connection. So I'll jump into some text questions right here. If anyone is in the audience and they know somebody who they think would like to come give some Ancaps a rough going over, by all means, please invite them in. And if anybody here if you're a libertarian or an Ancap and you would like to just ask a question, feel free. There is an invitation to the Discord. All you have to do is join the Discord, join the waiting room, and our call screener will send you through. In the meantime, here's a question I had submitted.
I do have one suggestion.
Sure.
I believe if you click on the 3 dots to the right of that link you put into the chat, you should be able to pin that message to the chat so that people can more easily see it. In the
perfect.
YouTube chat, that is.
Yep,
Yeah.
there it is. All right. Perfect. Well, that saves me having to go back every 5 minutes and repost it. Okay, so the next question I got that was submitted in text form is regarding the abolition of universal health care, public education, and other government-subsidized services in an Ancap society. How can a free market economy help those in poverty? Now, that's a big question, huh?
Yeah, so I would say, first of all, I would challenge the premise that, like, it's in any way anybody's responsibility, or even especially a legal system's responsibility, because that's what we're proposing here, is a certain legal order, which implies a free market. Now, it's not the responsibility. We believe this is a correct legal system. Now, it's not the responsibility of truth to help people in poverty, right? We have to understand what is poverty. Poverty, as Per Beelan points out many times, that's the natural state of man. There isn't something specific which causes poverty. What the real question is, what causes prosperity? And it's the specific actions of individuals using their own minds and their own judgment to engage in productive activities. That's what causes prosperity. Now, so the only way you can have prosperity is if you have freedom. Because if I don't have freedom, the freedom to choose, then I can't judge what is proper, what is improper, what is productive, what is unproductive. Right? I can't be productive if I'm a slave. There's no sense of productivity among slaves. So really, that it's sort of an inverted question. It's, okay, well, we've got all this freedom to produce all this productivity, but then what about the people who didn't produce? Well, it's kind of like, it's their responsibility to do that production. Now, I think it is worth noting that if you have this free market, where you don't have all of this destruction of wealth, destruction of capital, then you have an unbelievable level of productivity. Like, people kind of, it's like a frog boiling in water, almost. Pardon me. If you consider, I'm not like Mr. Moneybags over here or anything, but I'm telling you right now, I am vastly wealthier than every single medieval king put together, I would say. And I think that is probably true of every single person in chat, everybody who's watching this video. I cannot try and think of a single Middle Ages monarch who would be wealthier than you. Count off how many of them had indoor plumbing. 0 of them. Count off how many of them could talk to somebody who's in Canada whilst they live in Scotland. 0 of them. 0 of them would be able to do any of these things we take for granted every single day. Right? People kind of don't understand just how wealthy they are. And it's like, I would rather be the poorest person in the anarcho-capitalist society than the richest person in Soviet Russia. Like, easily. I would easily take that any day. Because I would be way richer. Even throwing aside the ethical point of it would be evil. I would lack any self-esteem if I lived in such a terrible world where the government's controlling everything. Throw that to the side even. Even if I'm just looking at how much money I'm going to get in real terms, I'm going to be way wealthier, even if I'm like living on the streets in Ancapistan. Like, I'd be so much wealthier. It's people can't really picture it in their minds. And this ties into the economic calculation problem. We think it's an actual like law of economics that you can't picture all of this in your mind. That's why you need the market in the first place. You need to distribute this knowledge and have the knowledge, controlled by who actually is best able to control it. There's this Hayek's point about the knowledge problem. So yeah, like I would just question some of the premises in that question.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer, and it sort of reminds me of what Bastiat argued when he was saying that the most important economic attribute you could have, or the most important attribute to somebody who is an economic thinker, is the capability of imagining the unseen costs rather than the seen versus the unseen. And I think that this question sort of invites a discussion about what is the most effective way that we can think of to educate people on starting to think about the unseen costs. I don't know the answer to that question, but I do want to say, at a more superficial level than your answer, Zulu, is that I find a lot of people, you can make a really compelling case, and I'm really just constraining this to perhaps a layperson audience, but you can make a really compelling case that the free market produces a much better outcome economically for 99% of the population. And a really common objection is, yes, but they're really concerned about the people who fall through the cracks. And, they can kind of try to corner you, and one way they'll do this is they'll make this sort of sacrificial hypothetical person, and they'll go through it like this. They'll say, well, what if this person has no friends, and they have no family, and they live in a community that just abhors them for whatever reason, or is choosing to ignore them, then they're so impoverished that they can't leave the community, in this like progressively more extreme case of poverty, one that I think would obviously represent far less than even 1% of the population now. And they're really concerned that if we went with capitalism, even if we were able to cause such an enormous improvement in the quality of life for so many people, it would be just unacceptable that we would have a system that allows people to fall through the cracks. And I think that for a lot of people, that little sort of gemstone of concern there is the demonic soul stone, if I can be nerdy enough to say that, that's infecting them and preventing them from thinking about it clearly, because it's not true. If you look at the systems that have the most socialized healthcare right now, let me give you an example, like speaking from my perspective as a Canadian, and I'm sure, Zulu, that you're going to have a similar one being in and around the UK with the NHS over there. Our system just is actively killing people. And I'm not talking about medical assistance and dying. I won't go into an anecdotes of experiences I had in particular, but if you just look at the statistics, we just have tens of thousands of people dying every year, things that are preventable, and they're either fatal in their particular cases because of delays in having been diagnosed, or delay in getting access to the treatment that they needed. So even if it were true that this is some sort of issue that need to be resolved by the free market, clearly the alternative doesn't have the capability of answering the question anyway, because our socialized healthcare system seems to be causing enormous amounts of suffering and death. But I think also, too, it's important for people who are sort of stuck on the falling through the cracks problem to remember that this is sort of a necessary attribute of every system. Because if you have to bring attention to the concern about this person by creating such a tortured hypothetical person, then you might have crossed over into a situation where there's just a certain amount of limitation because of the imperfect access to knowledge that human beings have. I think every system has a case that could be, if we just have one hypothetical, is what if there's something happening that people just don't know about in time? Just, of course, every system has that vulnerability. All right, so before I jump into the next question, Do you have any last thoughts about that?
Yeah, I do. Like, I want to kind of go into what it kind of reveals a certain motivation they have when they do this sort of attack with, like, well, imagine like just the worst possible guy. He's alienated everybody. Nobody wants to help this guy. Like, this is just the worst guy. And so they're saying that we need to tear down all of the best people in society for the sake of this class of the worst in society. We're destroying the productive because they produced, right? And we're helping the anti-productive because they're anti-productive, because they're so awful. That's why they should be helped at the expense of the people who are so good. This is what Ayn Rand described as envy. She used that term in a very specific way. Hatred of the good because it is good. Right? I think that really reveals the underlying motivation of the socialists. And because you can even just think about this a step further. It's like, okay, well then what would you do about it, Mr. Hypothetical Socialist? Well, of course, we need to have the government control every aspect of the economy. Now, of course, there are a bunch of people in the middle, but I reject all of that. It's one or the other. You can't have it. You can't have the middle road. I mean, Mises showed this very eloquently, and in fact, his theory has been developed even further into a political strategy theory by a friend of mine, Nikola Pavlovich, who's a moderator of mine. Where it's called the arrow of regression, where if you consider some policy in the middle, either it's going to regress into socialism or it's going to regress into capitalism. Now, the flipping point is whether it is based on the premise that the government can solve problems. Because, well, gee whiz, if the government can solve problems, and we got this like problem of, the very most awful people in society, as it turns out they're so awful that now nobody wants to help them, and they're starving to death or whatever. It's like, oh, the government can solve this problem. Well, if that premise is true, then it applies everywhere. And as we know, anytime the government comes in and intervenes, suddenly you're going to get more problems. And then those problems, well, the government can solve those problems. And then you're going to get more problems. And it regresses in this way. It's a recursive issue. And that's how you get to total socialism. Whereas if you have the premise that government can't solve problems, then you regress into total capitalism. So those are really your only two choices. And so, is life for this most awful person, is life better for them in the Soviet Union, where you have total socialist control over everything? I mean, that's not clear to me at all.
No, I completely agree with the validity of that line of reasoning. I think that it's very frustrating at times to have that conversation of, is the government capable of solving problems, the way you phrase it, because that is really the crux of the conversation a lot of the time. And what you'll find is, in my experience, that it's as if, I'm sorry for using so many hypotheticals today, but it's as if they're like playing with a puzzle box, and every time they guess at a configuration and they're wrong, like mass amounts of death occur and huge, enormous amounts of waste. I mean, the NHS and the Canadian healthcare system absolutely are engines of mass murder. If even the government's willing to point at the healthcare system and say, "Whoopsie, that was another 30,000 this year that they just would have lived if we weren't the ones in charge of taking care of them." If even they're willing to admit that, it must be a pretty serious issue. But what's so frustrating, I think, for people who are, especially Austrian economists, people who are familiar with the free market, is that from our point of view, that puzzle box doesn't even have a possible solution. There's no configuration that they can get to where they are going to find success. And moreover, the alternative to the puzzle box is we just have a button that you press, and it's an imperfect but much better system. And they think that the button is so abhorrent for reasons that I think often we have a difficult time even perceiving, that they will just never press the button. They'll just keep playing, trying to figure out the exact configuration that the puzzle box needs to be in, or that the government needs to be in, and I guess the rest of us are just left to watch the devastation. I'll move on to the next question now because I think these two questions are actually kind of interesting. The first one's a big topic again, but why is permitting culturally taboo activities, and he gives a couple of examples, which is legalizing all drugs, prostitution, and gambling, better than the alternative of prohibition? And I want to just say, so that we don't spend too long on this one, the word better is invoking some kind of justification, and we got to know, in order to answer the question, what kind of justification are we talking about? Talking about ethically better? Instrumentally better? Are we talking about legally better? Right? What legal system? This is a question that really needs that aspect to be fleshed out before we can give a confident answer. But I think Zulu and I can both give a short answer, which is that from our point of view, the anarcho-capitalist position is saying that we shouldn't aggress on people's property rights, especially not at an institutional level. So the two alternatives that we're being asked to compare here, one of them contains property rights violations and the other one doesn't. So that is a simple way of distinguishing why one's better than the other. And I think the retort is always going to be, well, if you let people do these things, they're going to make mistakes, and people are going to get hurt. So, is property rights really that important? And I think the answer to that question should just be yes, because in a free market, the people who are being hurt, and again, no claims to perfection here. This isn't a utopian claim, but the people who are taking the risks are going to more often be the people who are they're putting their own property on the line, so to speak. So the incentives are better aligned. Now, I think that's a whole big topic, but I want to avoid giving this question too much attention. So, Zulu, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I do, because obviously you're completely correct there. Like the fundamental point is, like, do you have a right to stop some person from putting substances into their own body? And the answer is no. Right, so that would just be like the be all end all as far as anarcho-capitalism is concerned. But I do want to bring up just a historical point here. Namely, that like people have this kind of perception of like the drug cartels and whatnot. Obviously, that they're like the most violent people you could ever imagine on planet Earth. Like just the most awful, awful people. Now, how did that come about? Why specifically in the drug dealing game did they become so monstrous? And the answer is it was because of Prohibition. Right? They used to not be particularly, evil. Obviously, they would shoot somebody if they're coming on our turf or whatever. There would be some scuffles like that. There weren't necessarily the most upstanding gentlemen in the entire world. But they weren't truly monstrous until the United States did this amazing thing called the War on Drugs. And then what they did was they came in and they arrested or killed all of the quote-unquote good guys. And then what do you get when you have a dish of bacteria and you start introducing antibiotics? Well, after a few generations, you're going to get some antibiotic-resistant bacteria. And that's what you get in the drug world. You get the type of drug dealers who are resistant to the kind of state violence that the United States government can bring. And those are going to be the baddest motherfuckers you can possibly imagine. Those are the people you get when you introduce that sort of market pressure, right? So, Prohibition, it might sound all like, oh, we can just wave this magic wand and then suddenly nothing bad happens. No, you actually get a whole lot more violence. You get a whole lot more, distrust. It moves it away from from what would the agorists would describe as a black market into a red market. It moves it more in the direction of a red market where you're really trading blood. And that's how you get all these, you can't really trust your local MS-13 guy to be doing you good on some trade, because if you start talking shit, he's going to, pop a cap in your ass or whatever, right? This is not a, anywhere close to any sort of amicable business. But the more free market it gets, is your local weed dispensary, is the guy who runs that gonna, put a bunch of fentanyl in your weed? No, he's not, is he?
It's amazing to me how fearful we can be about this particular topic because of like you said with the local weed dispenser, and maybe I'm missing something here. Maybe there's a reason that this isn't as effective of an argument as I think it is. But I wonder why people don't question. Like, if you see McDonald's and Burger King, for example, there's a lot of money on the line with these businesses, department stores, restaurants, all kinds of businesses that are currently legal, pharmacy, right? Lots of things. You don't really hear about Shoppers Drug Mart firebombing, I don't know, a Zellers. I don't know what stores are going to be recognizable brands for the non-Canadians. You don't hear about it with McDonald's and Burger King. And I think the shortest way that I like to sum up exactly what you're saying about the red market and the black market is just to say that if you make something illegal, you've removed the ability for the participants to pursue a peaceful resolution to their issues. And so it seems so obvious that if you take away the peaceful resolution, you've only put them in a position where if they have any kind of issues, they have to resolve it through violence. Where I am in Canada, we recently legalized marijuana. There are stretches of the highway now that are just completely covered in all sorts of like marijuana dispensaries. I mean, I can think of a few that are just like, I don't know, 25 in a row, and there's no issues between them. You don't hear about any kind of vandalism. They're just competing. And I think that should be readily available to people who are paying attention, that if you just let people compete, they don't seem to desire to, explode each other. Of course, it does happen, I guess. If you're okay, Zulu, we've got a caller, and there is another question that I wanted to do that was submitted. That's going to bring us a little bit over time if we do both. Is that okay with you?
Yeah, I'm fine.
Perfect. All right, I'm going to jump into the text question, and then we'll take care of the caller who's calling in as soon as they're done being screened. So the question is written as follows. Not to sound offensive, as this applies to me as well, but many economists with degrees and other educational credentials would disagree with the philosophy of anarcho-capitalism. Why do you think they disagree with the system, and why should we go against their beliefs if most, not all, anarcho-capitalists don't have the same credentials? Do you want to go first, or you want me to take a crack at it?
Sure. So I'm going to approach this not necessarily, obviously, like I will just say in the first case, obviously it doesn't matter if something's true. It's true whether the entire world regards it as false or not, right? So that's just in the first case. But I do want to take this in not necessarily a narco-capitalist direction, but in a philosophy of history direction, right? What is causing, what is the underlying cause for pretty much the entire economic establishment to reject this? What is the cause of pretty much the entire physics establishment to reject the ether? Which, if you're familiar with that debate, then you'll know what I'm talking about. What is the cause for pretty much the entire philosophical establishment to embrace philosophers who I would regard as utterly contemptible? Well, it is based on what is the philosophy of the day. The philosophy is the fundamental. So I think that we've had some philosophers who have come about over the past century or so who have brought in an anti-reality mindset. Obviously, I'm an objectivist, so I'm referring to Immanuel Kant as the main arch villain. Now, this is not necessarily, if you're looking for Ancap positions, there are of course anarcho-capitalists who are Kantians, but I think that is the fundamental reason for why you get a lot of rot in these institutions, and the philosophy, it trickles all the way down throughout the entire intellectual establishment, right? Because the economist, he isn't acting in the most fundamental sense. If he's in a society where pragmatism is the philosophy of the day, well, that's going to inform his economic beliefs. If he's got a generally Platonist mindset, that's going to inform his economic beliefs. All of this is going to inform their beliefs. So really, I don't care much what the establishment of any field says. What I care about is true. And to, like, maybe make this a little less controversial, I will, well, controversial for people in our sphere, it'll be way more controversial for the physicists, but I will elaborate on that example just a little bit. Ether is supposedly debunked that, well, given that light is a wave, there has to be some medium that is waving, and that medium is called the ether, the luminiferous ether. This is supposedly debunked by the Michelson-Morley experiment, but you could never debunk such a thing. Because what is a wave? Well, it's a change in quantity of something periodically over time. But you can't just have floating quantities. This is, metaphysics tells us this. Right? So that philosophical rot has taken hold of the modern physics establishment, that they would reject something as simple as saying that a field, well, that's just an array of quantities over space. The quantities have to be quantities of something, right? Some entity has to be underlying here, which is why you have to have an ether, and why Inductica is entirely correct on that.
Sure. Of course, I totally agree with all of that. And I just want to say, I hate this question. I wanted to get to it because I hate it so much. And the thing I hate about it, the attribute that it has, is it's just very difficult to get any purchase on with your hands. It's kind of like just a matter of perception. So I'm going to offer an anecdote, a brief one. And if you've been a part of the university institution before, I have a bachelor's degree. And it's something that you should, I think, if you complete your 4-year degree, you should already have enough experience. I mean, unless you coast the whole thing, but a lot of the research that gets done is ridiculous. I mean, it's just totally pointless. I was in psychology, but there were this was less so true, but still a little true for biology, chemistry, and then more so again true for physics and math. And everything in the humanities was just a wreck. All the theses that are done are basically you're just pretending. And there's a little bit of a expectation that when you move on to the next level, you're going to discover that, okay, I'm ready now because I did my thesis, and I'm ready to go and do this other work. And you can find grants that are millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars in some cases, to do work. And there's just nothing there. And it's difficult for me to really make a convincing case out of this because of the fact that I'm kind of avoiding, I don't want to point fingers at any particular grants that are being given out in my area right now, but what you're really looking at is, it's kind of like a Wizard of Oz situation is all I'm going to say. So if you really feel this, you're convinced of the Ancap arguments, but because you're aware that the establishment hasn't quite accepted Ancap, to say the least, you don't want to, it's too much of a big pill to swallow to just ignore what the establishment says. And I think, Zulu, you've made an incredible argument in terms of a logical reason that somebody should consider doing that. But it may be the case that the only effective way to swallow that pill is to become part of the institution for a brief time and see what they're doing in there, because the stench is overpowering, and once you're in there, you'll understand exactly why. Oh man, I shouldn't have been unable to swallow this pill, in other words. So that's what I'll say about that. If you think that treats that topic sufficiently, Zulu, we can move on to our next caller.
I mean, it's absolutely correct. I do want to just quickly say, because I was also in university, and you can, if you're a certain type of psychology, where you're not necessarily going to just conform, you just feel that rot, no matter what your fucking degree is. It's not just in the feminist dance studies or whatever. It's everywhere. I was in mathematics and physics, and the rot extends there. Believe you me. We had a lecture called off one day because the lecturer wanted to protest for climate change awareness. That's about the point where I rolled my eyes and was like, okay, well, what am I doing here?
Sure, sure. No, I totally had that same experience. I'm not going to get into all the stories. There are many, but I'll never forget one time I had somebody was actually screaming at me in my face from just a foot away, and they were upset with me because I had the audacity to tell somebody else that they were wrong about something. And this person actually, we were in a lounge, so they produced a piece of chalk. We had a chalkboard in the lounge. They got a chalk. They drew the number 6 on the floor so that I was standing on one side and they were standing on the other side. And they said, "Can you not see that from your point of view it's a 9, but it's from my point of view it's a 6?" And like if this simple demonstration can't explain to you why it's just totally ethically wrong to tell people they're wrong about absolutely anything, then I was beyond help and basically morally repugnant. And I hate telling that story because it's so crazy. I know that it just, your mind hearing that story will think, well, they must have been making, like, I must be strawmanning the point they were trying to make. I'm just going to leave it at that. It wasn't. That's exactly what they wanted to say.
It does strike me as straight up contradictory, just saying, well, you're wrong because look at this demonstration that you can never say anybody's wrong.
I mean, you'd think that would be I have a very socialist professor once who actually got frustrated in class because somebody said that to me, and he was like, wait, like he pointed out the same sort of relativistic issue that they have. Anyway, that's too much fun to go down that rabbit hole, so I guess we'll move on to the next caller. This caller, we have 2 in the queue. This next caller is going to invite disagreement between Zulu and I. So what I think we should do is I'm going to offer a different route to get to the same conclusion as Zulu, even though I think me and Zulu can both very openly just agree to disagree on maybe the route itself. But the topic is free will. So I'll go first if I can, Zulu, because I think I'll give a shorter answer.
Sure.
And then the floor will be yours. I'm going to pull in the caller now. Hello, Mr. Docs. How are you? You've been summoned into the show.
Hello, hello.
Now, I read your question. It had to do with the topic of free will, but if you want to take the opportunity to present it yourself, your question, we can do that, and then we'll jump into it.
Sure. So it sounds like maybe you and Liquid Zulu might disagree on this question, but I have an understanding of Liquid Zulu does believe that free will exists. I hold the position that free will doesn't exist, and I'm just curious, how do you justify or provide evidence for the existence of free will from some like anarcho-capitalist perspective or whatever your epistemological background is?
That's a great question. It's a very interesting question, and it is one that we disagree on. I was just saying before I pulled you in that we do. So here's the distinction is that I guess the position I'm coming from is a determinist, and what I mean by being a determinist is just that by virtue of the fact that it seems to me that the laws of physics apply fully to everything that's material, and I'm fully material, it must be the case that that's true for me and all of my components. This is peripheral to Ancap, so I'm willing to explain the position, but obviously I'm not going to go into defending it too much. I just want people to understand where I'm coming from. And so for me, let's take a look at it briefly from an Austrian economics point of view, from a praxeological point of view. In order for free will, let's say, fills a specific functional role in the topic of praxeology. And I think that it looks something like this. The actor has multiple different things that they could do, and they're aware of this to some capacity. And the way praxeology seems to work to me is you choose one of the options that was available to you, and by virtue of that choice, we've learned that you valued it more than the alternatives. Or in other words, you expected greater satisfaction from the results of that action than the satisfaction that would result as the consequence of the other actions you could have performed instead. So if we really break praxeology down into all of its components, if we imagine a deterministic universe, so I'm going to have to oversimplify it here for the sake of time, but I'm standing at a table and there's a bunch of grapes, an apple, and an orange, and it's deterministically true that all of my components are subject to the laws of physics. So if you turn back the clock or whatever, I'm just going to do the same thing every single time. But even if that's true, what is that thing that I'm doing each time? And as far as I can tell, that deterministic thing is going to look like this. I'm going to approach the table as a human with imperfect knowledge. I'm going to be aware of the options. And the extent to which you're aware of the options, for those who are unfamiliar with praxeology, is... Sorry, lost my train of thought there. I'm managing too many things at once. So you walk up to the table, and you're seeing the options, and the extent to which you're aware of the options is different in praxeology. Sometimes you could be planning this choice for months. Sometimes it's just like a instantaneous moment of reaching for one thing rather than the other without much thought at all. But it's there. Seems to me that we don't have to, even if we have a philosophical incompatibility there, the determinism, as I'm describing it, is not incompatible with praxeology at all. The person is subject to imperfect knowledge. They are aware of different alternative ways that they could act, and the way that they do ultimately act was based on the idea that... Sorry, I shouldn't frame it that way. Because they acted the way that they did, we can praxeologically infer that they preferred the expected result over the competing expected results. So that's all that is to say that in a deterministic worldview, you are in a situation where if you read, just take Man, Economy, and State as a single text, he starts with what human action is, and the implications just flow from there. It's 1,600 pages of inferences and implications, and none of those are invalidated by the deterministic worldview that I put forward. All of the components are there that are necessary for praxeology to be a fully healthy theory. Anyway, that's my full explanation, and I'd be totally happy to discuss this outside of the show, but I feel like I'd be irresponsible to the show if I took us too far down that route. So that's my input. Zulu, the floor is yours.
Sure. So obviously I do believe in free will, and I think this kind of clarifies why Austrians have this methodological dualism. Why it is that, well, for some reason, this is the standard Austrian line, that there is some reason why we can't study humans in the same way that we would study the electrons that the physicists would study, right? That doesn't really concern the economist. I'm perfectly fine with that. But I think free will is that reason. It highlights why there is a difference between human action and the action of the billiard balls. So I would say the primary evidence that you have free will is purely introspective. You can introspect and see that you have choice over the various actions you take within your mind. You have a choice whether to focus or drift, whether to think or evade. I have the choice whether to lift my hand or not to lift my hand. Right? I do have these choices. But beyond this, I think that determinism is simply a self-defeating proposition. So I don't think it can be... I would say I don't think it can be accepted within debate, because I think it actually wipes out knowledge itself. If you accept determinism, there could be no thing as a knowledge of determinism. So basically the validation of this is that without free will, you could not deliberately choose to align your mind with truth as against falsehood, right? So, because how would you hope to validate, for instance, the determinist thesis, right? If it is indeed the case that you have no choice over whether you believe it or not. Well, it's clearly the case that if determinism is true, that it's possible to believe false things still. Because those same immutable causal factors, however you want to describe them, determined me to believe in free will, which the determinist holds as false. But if that's the case, that you're just predetermined to believe things, and it's either going to be true or false, and you have no control over that, Like, by what possible means could you ever validate determinism? If you have no choice, but you're going to just believe in it, whatever, what would even be the sense of validating that position, right? How would you even know what the correct means of validation are? Because you're just predetermined to go by whatever means you're predetermined to choose, right? There's no way to deliberately use logic, even. There's no way to know what the correct way of validating a proposition that like determinism is. So I think it's not only self-defeating in the sense that it implies its own negation or anything. I think determinism is self-defeating in that it wipes out knowledge itself. So you don't have epistemology any longer if you have determinism.
So obviously,
So
sorry, go for it.
Oh, I just wanted to say, like, because there was kind of an analogy to, when you look at electrons and the economy and stuff like that. And I know you guys were talking about electrons earlier. In physics, there's a level of lack of knowledge that we have as well, which isn't to say that these models aren't still predictive. It's just that there's a lot of different variables and probably variables that we haven't discovered yet that lead to the outcomes of certain events. Like, for example, quantum indeterminacy would be something that's associated with radioactive decay, where you can't predict exactly the radioactive decay, but you can probabilistically predict it. And that's the same with economics, right? There's stochastic shocks in macroecon, where through things like DSGE models, these shocks are modeled as random variables. And with regarding probability, you can see, okay, what's the likelihood that we get this outcome from this input? You could look at probabilistic modeling of productivity or preferences or technology. You can't know for certain. And again, I think that just goes down to the models that we have available to us, not some truth about the world. I think if it is true, kind of what Ancap was saying, that we do have this deterministic outlook on how science works and applies to the universe, that there is only the material universe, which I don't know if you disagree with that, Liquid Zulu, if you think there's some other kind of thing to the universe. But if we agree that there's only the material, it seems obvious to me that these things are ultimately determined because of the laws of nature that exist out in the ether.
Let me just jump in there, if I may. I appreciate your input there. I just want to say the particular topic's very interesting to me. I think everyone can tell it's interesting to Zulu and I both. The most important thing in the scope of this show is to say that Zulu and I do agree that we can both get to Ancap this way. So I don't want to go down this road too much because it's sort of peripheral to Ancap. But I think that since you called in, you deserved to hear a full explanation of, how does my worldview get to Ancap, and how does Liquid Zulu's worldview get to Ancap on this topic of free will. I will say there's going to be lots of other opportunities to have a more thorough conversation about this. If you want to, ping us in the general chat text channel, and I'm sure that one or both of us would be willing to have a much lengthier conversation about this soon. I hope that seems fair.
Okay, yeah, that's fine.
I will be taking a poop immediately after this, so maybe wait like a little bit.
Sure. Well, I hope that it's not bad news then, that we've still got callers coming in. Zulu, you're free to...
Yeah, it'll be fine.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, Docs, I look forward to talking with you about this topic more, but I think we'll leave it there for this call-in. Is that all right?
All right, sounds good.
All right, thanks so much for calling in. We'll hear from you again.
Yeah.
Okay. Whew. Awesome. Glad we're getting some calls here. I'm going to go ahead and pull our next caller up. I'm just going to really quickly... so our next caller is going to be talking about something that's maybe dangerous on the... Oh, did we lose him? We lost our caller.
Yeah, we lost the one after Querly Dogs.
I think I know...
Crowd, I believe.
Yeah, that's too bad. I think that...
Oh, he looks like he's in the waiting room now.
He's back. I'm going to pull him over. Hello, Crod. You're on the show. You're skipping the waiting room this time.
Hello.
Hello. All right, so I got your question here. I'm going to just summarize it right quick, and then if you want to make sure that we understand it correctly. So basically, you're asking, in regard to anarcho-objectivism, is it necessary to utilize aggression for property ownership enforcement? Basically, when can you aggress against certain people, like current state agents? And I feel like that does have the potential to go in the against TOS point of view, but I do think it's a really interesting opportunity to maybe cross over to topics like anarcho-objectivism and agorism, and a bit of a more soft Ancap. Zulu, I'm going to let you take this one.
Sure. We'll say there will be no commentary on any violence against state agents. No commentary on that, because that is TOS. But I will say, in regards, just the general question, in regards to anarcho-objectivism, is it necessary to utilize aggression for property ownership enforcement? No. So the way that we would define aggression would be the initiation of conflict. We accept the non-aggression principle, right? That you would never aggress. So you wouldn't need aggression to enforce property, because aggression is actually abrogation of property. Now, the kind of confusion I'm assuming is that the non-aggression principle doesn't say pacifism. Right? I'm not saying you should never be violent, because indeed, somebody might be attacking you, trying to burn down your house, whatever else, right? And you're allowed to be violent against them, because they're the aggressor. It's not aggression to respond to some sort of threat or anything like that. That's not the aggressive part. And I believe this even goes back to there's this website which has Webster's original dictionary on it, where he defined aggression as the aggressor as the person who started this thing, not as the person who's responding to it. So I think this is just the natural way to think about what aggression is. We just are defining it in slightly more precise terms.
Yeah, if I was a doctor, I guess the prescription here is aggression and force and violence are different terms, different meanings. That seemed like the summary, the spark notes. What do you think about that, Crod? Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Like it does. Because I sometimes have that particular issue whenever I'm having to debate with other, I should say, people that are, trying to argue like against like anarcho-capitalism, whether those are ANCOMs or, anybody within that type of, a level of thinking to say, does aggression have certain particular limitations based off of, what purist thinking libertarians, argue for. And I think it's just like to me, like it makes me feel like that it's like a double-edged sword, because it's like, when is it justified to utilize that particular means of force?
Oh, so it's justified to use force whenever it's non-offensive. It would never be justified to use aggression.
And I guess really understanding property rights is just going to give you a really clear rule set for distinguishing whether or not what specific action you're considering is it going to evaluate as aggressive or not, even if it has violent attributes. Like Zulu said, aggression is something very specific. So as long as you know where the property rights lie, you can see that there are all kinds of cases where force and violence are not aggressive and therefore are justified. So I guess that kind of wraps up that whole question. Karad, are you satisfied that that is complete and total answer for you?
Yeah, like I definitely appreciate it, and thank you very much, Zulu, and you Mr. ask Ancap. I'm sorry, I don't know your name. I apologize.
No, it's all good. Ask Ancap's fine. I also have a channel on YouTube called Galazar.
Okay. All right. Well, yes, sir. I appreciate it, and I like watching your channel. Zulu. I've been following you for quite a long time.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Okay, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Awesome. All right. I hope we hear back from you again in the future, Mr. Kra. That was a fun question. Zulu,
I will just do a quick BRB before the next call because I do need to take a piss. Not going to be long at all.
Sure. All right. Well, that's good news because, well, it's good that he's taking the break now because it sounds like the next caller is going to be really interesting. I'm going to tell the audience now what the question sounds like it's going to be about. It sounds like the question is as follows. It seems like anarcho-capitalism presumes people are capable adults, but in reality people seem to require assistance, be it from their family or whatnot. So the caller is going to be asking us about, essentially, how do we justify this system in which there is no social safety net in the conventional sense, and when we live in conditions where such a thing seems necessary. And we're going to go ahead and give him the opportunity to phrase that question himself again. And I'm going to just take 1 minute here to review some texted in questions, and I'll answer those for you guys here. By the way, audience who's in the YouTube chat, feel free if you want to join the Discord. The pinned comment is there. Send your socialist friends to ask us questions and give us a hard time, or call in yourself if you want some clarification on some libertarian issues. Let's just take a quick message here. Well, there's one question that came in through text that was about Zulu's course online. So if anyone doesn't realize this, Zulu has a really great course that's for free online, and it basically goes over everything we're talking about here. It starts from his first principles on legal and ethical grounding, and it'll work you right through to the anarcho-capitalist worldview that we're advocating for here. I'm going to go ahead and put a link to that in the description for everyone to view, and if once the video's over, check out the description and you can go to that. Zulu, I sound like you're back. I was just plugging your course.
Yes. Well, thank you.
All right, so we are going to get our next caller in now. Our next caller wants to talk to us. I don't know if you read this yet, Zulu. I'll just say it again. The next caller is calling in to ask us about this question. It seems like anarcho-capitalism presumes people are capable adults, but in reality, they require assistance, be it from their family or whatnot. So they're going to advocate for the presence of a safety net. Okay, are you ready?
Yes, sir.
Let's do it. Hello, sir. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, hello.
Hello.
Yes.
Thanks for waiting.
Yeah, it's interesting. I have a friend who believes in anarcho-capitalism, but I have not studied myself. But so far, there is some thing that, as a normie, maybe I see society is more complicated than the theory of anarcho-capitalism.
Sure.
And because everyone is dependent on their own, it seems. I don't know the details, but that's my impression. But society is full of weaklings, elderly, children, women, pregnant, who cannot really support themselves without strong males with their wits or their strength. So how does it fit in with your theory? Yeah.
That's a great question. So I want to answer it like this. I want to frame the question like this, and then you can tell me if I'm sort of getting at what you were trying to get at here. So anarcho-capitalism, really simplifying it here, it's a ethical and legal prescription. We're saying you should not violate people's property rights, or in other words, you shouldn't aggress, shouldn't initiate conflict. That's our prescription, and we recognize that prescription leads to the conditions that we would call the free market. So we advocate for the free market, kind of secondary, but I mean, a lot of us study Austrian economics, so we also advocate for the free market explicitly, just by chance. But as anarcho-capitalists, that's what I really want to understand. We're prescribing non-aggression. We recognize that non-aggression creates conditions that we would describe as the free market, and we think the free market's pretty cool, pretty good, pretty effective. So if that's what anarcho-capitalism is your question something like this? Should we accept a prescription that leads to the free market if the free market doesn't include built-in social safety nets. Is that kind of like what the question is? Is that fair?
I guess so. Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Well, what I would say to that is what we're advocating for. I mean, if there's one thing I really want you to take away from this, what we're advocating for is not a absence of those needs being met. We believe in something that's an alternative way for them to be met. And so the free market is, in our opinion, a superior delivery method for what you might call a social safety net. But it wouldn't be a social safety net in the socialist sense, where it's derived from taxes that are collected and social services that are administered by a government. It's a social safety net in the sense that, well, it's social. It's a consequence of the pro-social activities of the competing firms on the free market. I do want to say, before I hand this over to Zulu as well, we spoke about something earlier, and I think, like in this call, that I think really had a lot in common with this question, which is how do we deal with people who are really concerned with falling through the cracks? Because I think, and I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, so feel free to tell me if this doesn't accurately correspond to your position, but it sounds like you're worried that if we just trust the market, you know, there's always going to be somebody who just can't afford their health care and they're not going to get treated, right? Somebody who...
It's the value that every human has the same value. It's a Christian notion, you know, in the Western society. So that's a precondition in this debate for me, and maybe for you too. That we should help everybody should survive. Maybe, or you, yeah.
Well, I do want to jump in here. I would say that every human has the same value with respect to the law, but not with respect to like actual moral worth. And I think that's actually a profoundly evil viewpoint. Now, I would obviously believe that my co-host here has a far greater value to me. I would much rather spend time talking to him than like some 60 IQ, you know, sociopath who's currently locked up in prison because he like murdered his whole family after he like you know, went animal mode on them. Right? I would much rather. I think my co-host has a far greater value than that. There's this quote from a show called Pluribus. Is it not evil to value a man the same as you would a fly? Right? I think that is evil. I think you should have discrimination in your value skills. You should discriminate against different people for different reasons. Not everybody is of the same moral worth to you. So the thrust of your question that like, well, there's all these weaklings who cannot support themselves. I mean, my only response to that is, well, you know, who will help them? Who cares? Someone will help them, or no one will help them. It's not really my problem, and it isn't the problem of the legal theory if nobody helps them, right? You brought up the elderly. Well, if that person has spent their life, presumably if they had some sort of career, they should save for retirement, or, you know, build up a family, which they will, you know, maintain a relationship with so that their family can take care of them. Okay. Or, you know, the children, I want children to have guardians. I do believe in that. And then the guardians can care for those children. And you brought up women as well. I mean, women are fully capable of working. I say let them work, or if they want, you know, find a husband who will work and then they can take care of the house or whatever. Like, this really, it's not my problem whether some specific person is able to find a way to sustain themselves. And I don't think it's a problem apt for legal theory.
If I can just, before you respond, Nils, I just want to put a bow on that. So for me, you're hearing that the free market is going to be, out of the set of all the imperfect methods, the free market gives us the best results. Something that Zulu and I think could both talk about at length would be something like mutual aids. So these are sort of fraternal societies that have a very strong track record of taking care of everybody in the community. This is a real historical thing. So on one hand, you're hearing from me the free market's just the best at taking care of people within the constraints of an imperfect situation. No system can take care of everybody. And on Zulu's side, you're hearing why for those people who do fall through the cracks, this doesn't really pose a legal or ethical conundrum for what we're advocating for. So how do you feel about that?
Yes, the free market is okay. I know about Adam Smith, the founder, and he has he builds on laws. He recognizes we need laws, society control with the free market to function, but so he's not an extremist laissez-faire market as far as I've understood without being an expert. But so market is it gives wealth to the nations, as the title of his book says. But it's interesting the view on the human worth. That's a key point here, I guess, that maybe separates our philosophy. Yeah.
Let me ask you this question, if I may. So, I want to be transparent with you. I'm not a Christian, but I think that many people who are Ancaps are Christians, and I find that it's very easy for us to completely see eye to eye. I've never had an issue with a Christian Ancap, at least not on the basis of their Christianity or my atheism playing into it. I want to ask you then about, obviously, from my point of view, we're talking about the human worth. If humans are all equally valuable, they have this intrinsic worth, then why is it that we're, and I'm not trying to mischaracterize you here, but it sounds like we're advocating for redistribution. So it must be then that we're choosing, we're sort of ordering two different people relative to one another, such that we're willing to harm one to help another, right? So I'm just curious. I'm not suggesting this is like a nuclear bomb on your argument or your position, but I'm curious. How do you reconcile this, the priority of everybody having a shared value, with the prescription that we need to treat people unequally?
Well, it's complicated. I'm not a fully socialist. That's a fact. I'm more a conservative, right-wing normie, I would say. Christian Democrat or what? Yeah, it's different names, but it doesn't matter really. I come from a Viking country, as I say, and the Vikings were clan-based. So that's a good starting model to see the evolution from the clan, how there's some good basic points. The male chief, the fathers, they had their positions, and because of their strength, they could keep the tribe together. They could protect against the enemies. But then it was a brutal society, the Viking Age, and Christianity overcame and merged with the Vikings, so you can say, and it was a good merge in the 13th century. Then the law came in written form here in my Nordic country, and we still keep the basic points of the common goods like nature, but there is private property for the individual, but not all the nature. But it's we have evolved to the welfare state, as you know, the Nordic. There are leaders there, and there's exaggerations there. I want to take a step back maybe and something and more leave it more to the clan or the family, the greater family maybe, where the grandfathers and all live together and work together and as a unit, and in that sense take care of the weak ones, to the elderly inside the family, especially when you have a small farm or something. It's ideal for that kind, but that's my vision. But
well, I appreciate you sharing your perspective with us. I want to give Zulu the last word here, but I'm just going to transition to that by I want to ask you to consider that if you have the personal priority that everyone ought to be equal, I think that the best way, what I would advocate for, is the best way to express a belief that everybody is equal in the eyes of God, if you're a Christian, or just in general, if you're an atheist like myself. I think the best way to manifest that is by having it so that everybody is equally respected in their property rights, and then be very grateful that the free market that emerges from such an equal attribution of property rights, it just happens to also be the absolute best solution we've ever come up with for taking care of ourselves at the communal level, based on mutual aid. That's what my prescription would be. And Zulu, I'll let you have the last word on this one.
Sure. So I do want to just have like one fundamental point here, which is that there is some cause from which we got the wealth necessary to support these weaklings in the first place. Let's take as given that there are these weaklings in society, and perhaps we even want to help these weaklings, right? But to do that, you need the wealth. All right, so how did you get that wealth? You got it through production. But to have production, individual men have to use their own judgment, use their own mind as they see fit. So freedom is itself a precondition of wealth. So you were talking about welfare there, how you want there to be welfare. Well, the way you get that welfare, the funds for that welfare in the first place, is through production, which requires freedom. But freedom is being destroyed by welfare. Production is being punished by welfare. So the principle that you're advocating, this redistributionist policy, actually undercuts itself. It's destroying the very thing which it relies upon. So really the only non-contradictory way you could ever, that is, the only way you could help these weaklings without destroying the project you're trying to implement is by having a free market. And then you could have mutual aid, you could have charity, you could do whatever you want, right? But then at least you're getting the wealth in the first place in order to help the weaklings. Without freedom, it's impossible. You're destroying your own, the root of the entire project.
Can I comment?
Yeah, please. We'll take the next caller after this comment, but yeah, please let me know if you think that that's been effective at answering your question.
I have a little bit of knowledge of Immanuel Kant, and as grown up, I'm not elderly, but I'm approaching in 30 years maybe. I'm elderly, and if I help my elderly family members or neighbors today, I have a hope and belief that someone else will help me when I am elderly. So that's also fundamental. So thank you. It was interesting thought. So thank you.
Thanks so much for calling in. I hope we hear from you again. We would love to probably carry on this conversation if we weren't so pressed for time. So thanks again.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
All right, I think that was a good one, Zulu. I've got another one here. If you're interested in discussing the topic of libertarian strategy, how do we go from where we are now to anarcho-capitalism in tactical terms? Hello, Zern.
Yeah, hi.
Hi.
I guess let me kind of, if you give me a chance to like, kind of ask my question and also give a scenario, right? If I could. So
Sure.
my question is there an order of operations in order to achieve the world that we want to see? So I know Liquid Zulu talks about like, obviously you need to change the philosophy of the day. That's the first thing, right? But the scenario I'm thinking of, we also talked about where, let's say there was a big red button that said abolish the state right now. So in the context of, let's say, the US, we were to go ahead, eliminate all the institutions that are run by the government and whatnot. Should we do that and potentially allow, within that moment of chaos, even worse status to come in and take advantage, let's say like China, Canada, who knows, whatever it is, take advantage of the moment and even have a worse status system than we currently have? I guess that's kind of where my question is.
Well, I'll say just one sentence on that, and I think Zulu's going to have more to say on that. My response to that would be that if you presuppose that the philosophy of the day is anarcho-capitalism, or in other words, that people are recognizing their property rights, if you abolish the state with the button, and then another state starts to move in, well, what's the relationship that other state is going to have with these newly emancipated people? If it's going to be one of taxation, then it's aggression. And so the answer to that is self-defense. And the people in this newly liberated society would have every incentive to band together and do their absolute darndest to succeed and cooperate in that self-defense. The only other way that you could expand on that answer, I think, is to say, well, what if the state is just too powerful and it beats them? And I think that I would urge you to consider that if that was the way you went, and it might not be, but that's a common response we would get. And if you go that way and you sort of say, well, what if the state's just too strong? That is unfortunately just a problem that every system is equally susceptible to, because you could say it for democracies or communists. Like, what if you're a communist, you want to erect a communist state, but there's a capitalist state next door, and I don't even think capitalist state makes sense, but let's just say, because that's how they would see it. The communists would say, well, what if there's a capitalist state that's next door to us? It just takes us over because it's too strong. So I would say that rebuttal would be moot, and I will hand it over to Zulu from there.
Sure. So I'll say this sort of notion of an order of operations. You see it come up a lot in the border debate. Obviously, I'm a believer in open borders. You can see me expound great lengths on that over on my channel. But the idea from some of the bordertarians, as they're called, is that, well, we need to follow the correct order of operations. That we need to abolish the welfare state first, and then we can deal with the borders afterwards. But we should refrain from abolishing border restrictions until we've done that first thing, because or else we're breaking this order of operations, right? So I would say that in that sense, an order of operations is completely farcical. You're trying to centrally plan liberty there. That's not how it works. That's not how any political movement has ever gained power in the history of mankind. It's not by carefully planning out, okay, and then we're going to do this thing, and then we're going to, we're not Yagami Light here or anything like that. We're not trying to think 10 trillion chess moves ahead, because life isn't chess. All right, we can't have this chess engine mindset. We've got to grab whatever we can wherever it presents itself. So, and the fundamental thing is that everything on that, all of those moves you could possibly take, all those moves you could make in the short run, all of them are downstream of whatever the philosophy of the day is. That's why I am so heavy on just all you gotta do is reach the remnant. Just keep standing on that step. This obviously comes from Albert J. Nock's Isaiah's Job. All you gotta do is stand on that step and preach the message every single day. Right, this is the Ron Paul strategy. And then you can start to change the philosophy of the day. And once you've changed the philosophy of the day, everything else is downstream of that. It's completely... It's not even secondary. It's not even tertiary. It's so far down the line. This issue of, well, we gotta get our guy elected to local government so we can get this policy implemented. It's sure, if you can get some policy implemented that'll improve your business or whatever, obviously non-aggressively, it'll reduce some tax. Sure, go for it. But that is not fundamental in terms of libertarian strategy. It is so far from fundamental. All that is fundamental is changing the philosophy of the day. And once you change the philosophy of the day, I believe Leonard E. Reed, he has this analogy of politicians are kind of like thermometers, right? They just follow the political temperature. Whatever the political temperature is, they're going to follow it and try and match up with it. That's the role of the politicians. You shouldn't be a thermometer. You should be twisting that thermostat. You should be setting the political temperature. And the means through which you set the political temperature is by changing the philosophy of the day. nothing else matters. If you're trying to start making the world anarcho-capitalist, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to be a politician, and I'm going to propose this bill, anarcho-capitalism today. Well, you might be able to. That might be a good test and check to see if the political temperature is there for it or not, but it probably isn't, right? But that's all that could ever do, unless you're both a politician and also a philosopher at the same time, who you could use your big stage afforded to you to preach the message and then change the political temperature. That can happen, but then you're not. That's not being a politician qua politics. Qua politics, all you are is a thermometer. And thermometers, they don't actually, as it turns out, make the room hotter.
Yeah, so I hear what you're saying, and I understand, like, the point is, you made a very decent point about it. What I'm just thinking is, like, okay, if let's say today the US, we had the opportunity, because usually revolutions and stuff like that usually happen with a small group of people. It's never the majority, right? You never get the philosophy to you just need a critical mass, right, to achieve that. And let's say you reach some critical mass and you get the opportunity, and we, let's say, do that. Do you really believe, let's say, for example, the US would be able to handle that, or would it just collapse, essentially, before we even got to go anywhere with it? That's kind of what I'm more like pointing at.
Well, so the US federal government in this scenario certainly has collapsed. Now, would the entire contiguous 50 states all be anarcho-capitalist? Not necessarily, right? It might be that it splits up, and some of those states are maintained alive, right? Some of those states might maintain themselves as a state, whereas others become like an anarchist region. That's entirely possible. But that's all just, what does the thermometer read?
I see. All right. Really appreciate you guys for answering.
For sure. I want to complicate that, if I can, by adding just one little thing in. This reminds me of a question. I think this is a little peripheral to your question, but this is a conversation I've been having with being involved with the Libertarian Party of Canada. And there's a distinction that I make between what I call pragmatism of the means and pragmatism of the ends. So, obviously, I agree with Zulu that we're aiming at something very specific, an anarcho-capitalist end result, and the faster we get there, the better, pretty much, including, I think with Zulu, it sounds like what he's communicating here is just the faster we get there, the better, but also instantaneous is only really the correct pathway. What I would say to people who are trying to just have a conversation about a really just political strategy is never, ever, ever be pragmatic on the ends. So you have to have a really clear philosophy about what your end goals are, what your principles are, and never be because pragmatism means, by definition, right, that you're making some sort of alteration relative to your assessment of the environment. And you can never do that with your ends. You can't. So if you're an Ancap, you can't justify changing your goals to now include aggression in some sense. I think that there is room for, and this is, I think, a pretty subjective thing coming from me now, but I think there is room for a little bit of pragmatism of the means, because if you like, you can never justify more aggression in the capacity that you're acting as a politician, then you've sacrificed the thing you're aiming at in the first place. But is there room for a conversation about which particular order of institutions should we get rid of? I would say that there could be, but if that is the case, it should be because the people around you still have sufficient influence that they're going to cause it to become necessary, because of they won't agree unless, you know what I mean? So you're sort of being you're in a situation where you've reached the point you can establish Ancap. You haven't reached the point where you can just snap your fingers. So you have to make a decision about what that kind of political strategy, I think, is pragmatism of the means. It's totally okay as long as you pursue that path, whatever strategy you end up settling on, without ever violating the means. Sorry, without ever violating the principles that are your end goals in the first place. You can riff off that if you want, Zulu.
Sure. So this would be basically, if I'm understanding you correctly, like, and I would agree that there are probably more important things, more urgent things to focus on, more urgent aggressions to focus on than others, right? It's probably more urgent in the United States to get rid of the Federal Reserve than it is to get rid of the Forestry Commission. The Federal Reserve is probably a much more urgent aggression to get rid of. Obviously, we should get rid of them. And if there was a bill, if they did present us that button, get rid of the Forestry Commission right now, then yeah, keep smashing it until your fingers blistered, right? Because we're keeping the ends in mind. But fundamentally, we're constrained by opportunity cost here, right? We do have an opportunity cost in what we would focus on if we are, to be launching some sort of campaign. And I think it's a lot more worthwhile to launch a campaign saying, like, hey, maybe we shouldn't be starting another forever war with Iran. Or maybe we shouldn't be printing off trillions of US dollars every year. Maybe we shouldn't be doing those things rather than, hey, don't you guys hate the fucking, like, National Park Service? Yeah, let's get them. Like, that's probably... obviously, yeah, it's a terrible thing. And, there are some libertarian affiliates where I've seen them, and I've been blocked by them, where they say that the National Park Service is the only good part of the US government. And I'm like, you are a fucking communist, and I despise you, and various other TOS things. But that doesn't mean that you need to spend your time launching a campaign against the National Parks Department unless it's, like, actually an achievable thing. Like, if there was public sentiment against the national parks, then, like, yeah, absolutely, jump on that issue and exacerbate it and be like, hey, no, this is actually a libertarian issue. Libertarians are in charge of this. You all other guys in this coalition, you got to follow our lead here. We're the ones running this coalition. And this is a point brought up in Springtime of Nations Libertarian Leninism series, that you got to find these hot button political issues of the day and just insert yourself into them and be like, no, this is a libertarian issue, actually. Like the example they used, one of the examples they used was the abolish the police movement. Well, we can insert, that's been predominantly a leftist movement. We can just insert ourselves into that and be like, yeah, abolish the police. And actually, you guys, you're following our lead now. This is a libertarian issue. You commies, you want police. So shut your mouths.
Yeah, I kind of feel what you're saying, especially when you mention, like, being the leaders. I kind of feel like sometimes libertarians get too preoccupied in maybe, like, what's the best chess move, right? But never actually make the move because they're this frozen in time trying to make the best, like, move when you should just make a move.
100%.
I kind of understand what you're saying.
Yeah,
that makes a lot of sense.
You're on a council, right? You can conceivably see a situation where you've gotten yourself onto a council, some sort of mayoral, municipal thing. You have the opportunity to get rid of a tax. You have the opportunity to get rid of a program, whatever. And it's not the whole picture. Then, yeah, you just take that and that's okay. You don't have to insist on doing everything all at once or nothing. The only thing that you have to remember is what you really should not do is get involved in something that sounds like, okay, we'll cut this, but we want to increase this tax. We want to add this new tax somewhere else. You know what I mean? Then like, you're doing the wrong thing. You're going in the wrong direction.
Like, that's trading off, like, certain things.
Yeah, because you're essentially you're taking away an aggression, but you're just putting a new aggression out there. And then if you do this sort of calculus in your head, where you say, well, this is a lesser aggression, then you're really in trouble. Then that's sort of the basis of socialism in the first place. Is, well, it's okay to aggress because it's worth it in the end. The means justify the ends. You don't want to be in that kind of thinking. You just want to be doing what you can and keep keep your principles close to your chest so that in that process you don't make none of the concessions you make. Like, a concession could be, okay, we'll get rid of parks, not the fire department yet, right? Fine, you can't win the game in your first move. But then a concession might be, like I said before, it might be, okay, we'll get rid of parks, but we need more funding to go to the fire department. That's a different question altogether. And then what you've done is, if you go that way, you've contradicted your principles, and that's not a strategic move. That's a self-refutation, I would say.
I do have to, on this point of how you would do this analyzing of policies, how you do it in a principled way of, is this a good policy? Is this a legitimate policy for libertarianism? I did put a link into the chat, and that is Fabian Liberty's interview with Nikola Pavlovich on his arrow of regression theory. This is how I think the correct way to look at these things is. In the YouTube chat, that is. Good policy. Is this you basically look at which way is the arrow pointing. Is this policy based on the premise that government can solve problems? Then it's pointing towards socialism. Bad policy. Reject it. If it's pointing in the way that government can't solve problems, then it's pointing towards capitalism. You should endorse it. And it could be basically the same policy, but depending on which way the arrow is pointing, you now know, what does this imply for our long-term goals? You know, it could be like, oh, we're going to modify the tax code because we believe in the Laffer curve and we want the maximum wealth for the government to solve as many problems as possible. Bad policy. Reject that. But if it says, we're going to modify the tax code because taxation is theft, and we can reduce, we can get rid of this sales tax or whatever, good policy. Absolutely endorse it. That's the lens through which I think you should look at these things.
Even though that might justify saying, oh, that might increase our government revenue, but in reality, you're leaving it more to the free market to actually get rid of a tax, even though they might have this. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, you're completely right. Yeah, sorry cutting you off, but yeah, it might this tax cut increase government revenue, but so long as that isn't like the motivation behind it, like we're trying to maximize government revenue, then it can still be a good policy.
I see. All right, this is awesome. Thank you. I'll definitely look that stuff up.
Excellent. Zulu, I don't know if it's just me, but I don't see the link you posted in the YouTube chat. I haven't seen any movement in the YouTube chat for some time, actually, so I'm wondering maybe I'm frozen.
It might like filter out links. So I'll put it in the Discord, and then you can try put it in, because you should be a moderator on your own chat, presumably.
Sure, I'll do that.
Throw it in.
I'll also, Zurin, I'll put it in the video description, so you'll have the opportunity to come back and find it that way, in case it's going to block me from putting a link in as well. So I hope that you're satisfied that we've given you a lot of perspective on that question.
Oh, 100%. I really appreciate it. I thought maybe it was too broad of a question, but you guys answered it perfectly. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much. I really appreciate it. Hope that we hear from you again. I guess what we're going to do now is, because we're double overtime, we'll take this to be our last call, and maybe Zulu, me and you can just answer one more written question, and we'll call it a day. What do you think?
Sure.
All right. Thanks so much, Cern. We'll see you next week, hopefully. Okay, that final question is like this. And so, it's pretty long, so I'm going to just read the first part, and if I discover that I've omitted something important, then I'll mention it in a moment. To what extent, and this is really related, I think, to what we were just discussing, to what extent can an Ancap interact with the state? And then their elaboration is, obviously there's certain things we can't get around, like using government roads, but to what extent can we take our own voluntary interaction with the state? I'll give some examples. I'm from Canada. Disgusting. And if anyone would like to work as a doctor or nurse, they would have to do a residency at a public hospital. Is this allowed? Or if you own a construction company, are you allowed to accept state contracts? Can ANCAPs join the military? And one more example, which is personal. I'm almost done lifeguard training. If I work for my municipal government, I can earn 35% more than if I work for the private sector. Is doing so moral? Zulu, do you want to take that? I feel like you've got a lot to say about that.
Sure. So I think the most fundamental thing is whether you're petitioning for increased aggression. So this relates to, I might accept welfare payments to like get back some of my tax money, for instance. If I was going out there and campaigning for we need more welfare for, people call my name, right? To not dox myself, then I would be petitioning for additional welfare. So I would be petitioning for additional aggression. And so that would not be kosher. So it's very difficult to untangle specific cases, because the state has its tentacles in literally everything, right? But I do think that the good rule of thumb you should use is, are you petitioning for additional aggressions here, right? Am I being some sort of parasite? That's another one, slightly different, right? And as a jurist, I'm just sat here in my armchair, and I can tell you the legal theory. Now, I'm not going to begin to unravel all of the many innumerable intricacies in some particular literal legal case, because I'm not a judge. I think all I can do is give you the general principles, and it's up to you to make that judgment call yourself. And I think it's a matter of your own self-esteem. Like, would you be able to, you might be able to make more money by being like a government employee or whatever. You'll certainly get a lot more job security. But would you have self-esteem? Would that push you to really be great? And that's a question you've got to untangle yourself, given the context of your own life and what the specific role is and what role the government has in that. And, was this a private company that the government, took over? And are there alternatives that you could do, privately? These are all things that you have to take into account. Like, do I believe that if you're in the Soviet Union and you're working in anything, that you're evil? No, I don't. I think there were many heroes in the Soviet Union, even though all of them were government employees. Right? So that's why it's much more complicated than just saying government employee, therefore evil. I don't think it's that simple.
Yeah, I think that I totally agree with that, and it seems trivially obvious that for most of us, it's going to be virtually impossible to reclaim the amount of money that's lost to us through doing these things. I mean, the income that you earn from the state's still going to be taxed, and then everything you could conceivably spend it on is going to be taxed. You're going to lose most of the wealth while it's sitting in your bank due to inflation. So it seems that unless you were in some very bizarre situation that's almost difficult to make a hypothetical for, where the contract that comes in is going to greatly exceed all the money you've ever given to the state, it's virtually impossible for you to come out of balance there. So I think for the most part, I would just chime in by agreeing with Zulu and saying that you're usually going to be able to justify this. And I just want to say as well, this might be sort of a strange thing to say, but I think that there's got to be some satisfaction in, if you anecdotally go into a lot of these places where you've worked for the government. I've worked for the government, if that actually factors into how you perceive our answer at all. I actually worked for citizenship and immigration for the Canadian government for a time. And you'll find that a lot of these people are just not going to do anything with that money. And I don't mean to be excessively judgmental, but if you're an activist, for example, I think that, it's not a huge stretch, perhaps, to imagine that the money is not only justified in returning to your possession after having been taken from you in the first place, but also that it's going to go to better use in a lot of cases. I think that the sense in which I'm saying it's going to better use is really the same sense in which when Zulu was earlier speaking about the topic of poverty and comparing sort of the people who, you make this hypothetical about somebody who's completely an outcast in their community and no one will help them and they have no resources. A lot of the times we can see that people get into situations like that through their own choices. And if you are working on a government contract, you're going to meet a lot of people like that, in my anecdotal experience. So I'll call it there on that question. And there's another question that just came in. It's a really long one, so I think we'll just end the video with a very brief treatment of it. It's just, why should we call ourselves capitalists? And I'm just going to say the only reason I use the word is because I find it effective to communicate that we're talking about the free market, we're talking about property rights. But I don't put too much weight in any conversation that has to do with, labels too much. I'm pretty open-minded about that. What do you think, Zulu?
Yeah, I'll say real quickly. Also, calling yourself a capitalist pisses off the exact right set of people. And I find that these anarchists without adjectives, these we're free markets, not capitalists. These types, they're included in that. We should definitely piss them off, because I think a lot of them end up just becoming total lefties, and we don't want that.
Yeah, I think that is exactly correct. It's very satisfying indeed. And I've been in Discord servers recently just promoting the show where I got not serious death threats, but pretty hostile reception just from saying the capitalist word. So Zulu's definitely right about that. Anyhow, that's been 2 hours, just a little over, and so I got to say thank you so much, Zulu. You've been so generous with your time for being here with us for this much overtime, but when the calls come in, I just can't help myself. So I'm going to put in a link to Zulu's show in the, Zulu's course that I was discussing during his break in the description, as well as the video that Zulu mentioned to the previous caller. I'm going to put both those in the description so that once, if you guys come back in about a half hour's time, those will be available. And Zulu, I think that's everything for me for this episode, so I'll let you have the last word.
Sure. Well, yeah, thank you very much for having me on. Thank you, everybody who came along, and make sure to keep watching the show, and hopefully we can get this darn thing monetized at some point. Wouldn't that be something?
Yes.
We're actually getting closer than I would think. We're already at we're averaging 20, 30 viewers here.
We're averaging, we were hovering around above north of 30 for a little while, and our view total is getting pretty high already. All of the videos we've made so far were several hundred views total, unique views. So yeah, it's doing well. And everybody, I cannot express this enough. Bring your friends who are minarchists. Bring your friends who are just run-of-the-mill liberals. Bring your socialist friends. We'd love to hear from people. We haven't had a serious, violent disagreement yet, and I'm thinking we might be able to keep that going. So bring them in. They'll be welcome, and we love to hear from them. And we will see you guys next weekend. And if everything goes according to plan, Saturday, 5 o'clock in the evening,